Welcome to this live Q&A hosted by the Cleft Lip and Palate Association on the subject of the treatment pathway. In this Q&A, we'll be focusing on ages 18 to 25 and the transition from child to adult services. This event is open to everyone in the CLAPA community, and I just want to say thank you to our funders, the National Lottery Community Fund and Smile Train for enabling this event to happen. My name's Kate. I am a parent of a child born with a cleft, and I have been volunteering for about 2.5 years. My son Harry was born with a unilateral cleft lip, and he's turning 3 in July.
So I'm Kate LaMarchal. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I'm based in the Evelina London Cleft Service, so we cover the southeast, south of the River Thames, and the southeast of the country. And I'm also currently the clinical lead or head of service for our team. That's me. I've been in Cleft for about more than 15 years now. Been around a while.
Thank you. Helen, do you want to go next?
So I'm Helen Robson. It's not London centric, it's just pure chance. So I'm the lead nurse for the North Thames Cleft Service. So we cover North London and over to Essex, so the county of Essex. I've been in Cleft for nearly 20 years. Yeah, so that's me really. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And Claudia.
Yeah, hi, my name is Claudia. I'm 23 years old. I was born with a unilateral cleft lip and palate. I was discharged a couple of years ago from all my cleft treatment and gone through all the different experiences you can have as a cleft patient. So I'm kind of here to speak as a on the experience side of everything.
My connection to cleft, I was born with bilateral cleft lip, and I have been volunteering with CLAPA since 2019.
Just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who submitted a question in advance, including members of the Children and Young People's Council at CLAPA. If you have any questions whilst watching, please do pop it in the comments, and someone from CLAPA will either respond directly or pass it on to us. We've had a lot of interest in this topic, so we'll do our very best to answer everyone's questions. However, if there are any questions that we don't get round to answering, then we will try and get back to you in the chat. So we better get to the questions. So question 1 that's been submitted is, what is the difference between care as a child and care as an adult? Does the level of support change?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, anybody welcome to join in.
So I'd say the main difference to that is, as an adult, you haven't got your mum and dad with you and you're in an adult hospital. And in children's services, you're very lucky because we're really cool with visiting times, and we extend it so people can come from 7 till 12 and parents can stay. Well, as an adult, when you move to adult services, and you could be 18, 19, you're suddenly on your own, and you might be, particularly with cleft surgery, you might be on a head and neck sort of ward where they're quite critically ill and cleft's lesser, so something that often gets feedback, or they didn't pay us as much attention and it was really lovely in children's services. So that's the thing that I've most found, that when people transition to, and Claudia's certainly nodding her head, I think that's what can happen when you move to an adult hospital. It's very different. The pressure is so different, and it's obviously a different ethos of care, really.
Okay. I would agree, and add to that, in that, so in terms of surgery operations, that's really true. It's the same for us it's very different being an adult on an adult ward versus being a child on a children's ward with your parents there. But I guess in terms of the wider care in cleft services, in some ways not a lot changes, in that you're still entitled to all the care that you need. You still come to your MDT clinics. I guess it's probably the same in your service, Helen, that people often still bring their parents with them, or a friend or a family member with them. So we do try in cleft services to be really inclusive and supportive. So in some senses, some things don't change. And I think cleft is a little bit unusual in that respect, in that, you continue with all the support you need. Absolutely. When you're having surgery, it's a bit of a different experience. And we try really hard to make it a positive and supportive experience and prepare people for that. But it is one of the key things that we're trying to prepare people for when they become an adult, and that's different in different services. I think, I don't know if it's the same in your hospital, Helen, but in ours, sort of turning 16 is really the cutoff for having surgery in the Children's Hospital, in the Evelina London Children's Hospital. So surgeries after the age of 16 are in a very different sort of environment. And so we try, certainly as a psychology team and a whole team, we try really to support people through that transition and prepare them for it and think about what that might look like and what the differences might be. I wonder what your experience has been, Claudia.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think like when I first got into the adult world, because my hospital didn't change, it was in the same kind of department I was always in. But I remember the first appointment that I was like in an adults department, and I was like, no, mum, you're not coming with me. I'm going to do this all on my own. And I was so excited to go in and do it all. But after that first appointment, I was like, no, let's have you back. And I think like I've always found with all the Cleft teams, they're really open to like my mum always coming with me or having someone there to be with you. So it like I feel like you have that excitement and that's really good, but it's also so fine to be like, actually I still need someone with me because you're still making these really big decisions, and at 16, 17, 18 you'll be making probably the biggest decisions of surgery, and to do that on your own, like, I couldn't remember everything to relay back to my parents. So I always found that my Cleft team are really open to kind of like having someone come with me. And then as for surgery, I never have had surgery going into an adult's ward, but the surgery I was going to have, they allowed me to go like look round the ward to kind of know what it looked like. So the psychologist kind of arranged for me and them to go and like look round what an adult ward would look like, kind of what you do. I had that on my bone graft as well, to kind of just know what to expect, because it's a lot busier, it's a lot different. There's no like cool giraffes and princesses on the walls, you know, but that really helped that transition. But I would say like don't feel like nervous or really silly if you still need to take someone with you, because I still take my mum to any appointment I have because I'm like, come with me please. So yeah, the Cleft team are really open to always doing that. But it's definitely like the psychologists I found were really good at kind of talking me through any like changes like to do with the surgery, because I think that's probably the biggest moment you see the change, because my team didn't really change too much, and the only stuff that would change is probably the language they would use. They'd be a bit more like open with the kind of healing processes and a bit more like not graphic, because they would know what to say and not what to say, but they kind of give you more options of like how much do you want to know, whereas like as a child they'll really keep you quite shielded. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Can I just ask you, Claudia, in terms of writing to, so obviously as you get to 18, you want to be independent. So I know some Cleft services have looked at actually writing to you. So when you get your appointment letters, I mean, I know all this is on like, you know, databases, Epic, etc. About writing to you as the patient rather than your parents. What's your reflection on that? Because that's something we've kind of looked at across Cleft services.
Yeah, I definitely remember like I was 16, 17 and I got the first letter and it was to me, and I was like, whoa, big moment. And I was like opening the letter and it was really exciting. I think it is nice because you do feel like your care is becoming more person-centered and you are getting more choice. And it's like, it's silly to say that like a letter kind of signifies that change, but it really was quite exciting when I got that first letter and it was to Claudia Piechka, not to anyone else. So yeah, it was really nice to kind of have that. But again, like it's something that you probably won't think of in the transition, but it's quite big to kind of have that first kind of thing to yourself. And yeah, like they're always like, I find they now would talk to me rather than talking to my parents in the appointments. They'll like address you and they'll just kind of like pretend that your parents aren't there sometimes because they're like, you're the patient we're talking to. So yeah, I definitely feel like, yeah, getting that letter was actually quite a big thing. I never really think of that, but yeah, I remember that being quite a significant moment.
I can take the second question, and it's about, will I be able to have more operations as an adult if I want to? Can an adult get plastic surgery? Who would like to go first?
Do you want to go first, Kate?
Did you say you will go first, Helen?
No, so you can go first on this one, Kate, and then I'll chip in.
I mean, I think the answer is yes. Basically, the short answer is yes. We don't. So in Cleft services, our sort of standard care pathway, if you like, is from 0 to 20-ish. But essentially, but we are funded to provide care to adults as well. And the only reason to say 0 to 20 is because if you've been in from birth, many people have had all the treatment that they're hoping to have by the time they're 20, but that's not always the case, and we're very flexible around that. And the team will will always be willing to discuss with you what further options there are. Sometimes there is no more surgery that's appropriate or useful or helpful for you. Sometimes there might be surgical options, you don't want them or need them. That's also absolutely fine. But if there are things you still want to consider and discuss, the team will be really open to discussing those with you and weighing up, what you want to do and why. And so yes, plastic surgery, and that would cover things like rhinoplasty, so nose surgeries or lip revisions. Those are common procedures we do for people who are adults. And in fact, a lot of the surgery we do waits until you are an adult because it's to do with facial growth and the timing and so on. Jaw surgery is one which if you need are suitable for having jaw surgery, that's something we don't really do for people until they are adults, because so that they've finished dental development and facial growth. So there's lots of surgeries that aren't even considered really until you're reaching adulthood. And lots of adults come back later in life, and by later in life I mean after the age of 20. People come back, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who've not had all the care that they needed, or it wasn't available to them when they were younger, and they come back, and we're always happy to discuss all those options again. So the short answer is yes, and that's a bit of the longer answer. I don't know if you would add anything to that, Helen.
I think I'd just add that this is where Kate's role is really, really important, because young people might want surgery because it fixes something that it might be something else. So it's really important that the role of the psychologist, checking that out, where their mindset is and things like that. So that's really, really important. And the thing I'd probably add in terms of returning adults. So I've certainly seen when I see new babies and parents or grandparents that have had a cleft and didn't realise that they could get their palate repaired. So we've had somebody when I was in another team, the grandma was 78 and we repaired her cleft palate. So there's no restriction on age or anything like that.
Yeah, and to follow up what you said there, Helen, about the role of psychology in the pathway, I think in all cleft services now, psychology is considered key in the decision making, not because psychologists are the gatekeepers to whether you can or can't have surgery, but to help people to process the information they're being given, the options that are available to them, and to think with them about their hopes and expectations. What are you hoping to achieve by having surgery? And there's the physical outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, the functional, practical outcomes, but there's also the kind of psychological outcomes that people are hoping to achieve, things to do with self-confidence, self-esteem, which are all reasonable things to expect and hope for from a surgery, but making sure that what you're expecting and hoping for in terms of change physically and psychologically are reasonable and not not unreasonable, not so that people aren't going to be disappointed with the outcome of surgery from in any way, shape or form. So psychology is offered certainly in our service. Anybody considering jaw surgery, so nationally we have a protocol around jaw surgery where everybody who's considering that process meets with a psychologist, and they and their families or friends, whoever they want, to go through it as much as is needed. And we've recently implemented in our service that everybody who's considering a rhinoplasty will meet with a psychologist as well. And again, not to gatekeep, but just to make sure that people have really had the opportunity to think about having surgery that changes your appearance. And, at a particular point in life, maybe at a transition time or as you're entering adulthood, and what that means for you and how you manage that. So, yeah.
I think as well, I was just going to add as well, like thinking back to that pathway of like the transition, it can sometimes feel like you're in that race of like, I'm transitioning to adults, I need to get everything done. But like you can like say, actually, I'm so done with hospitals and I'll come back in 30 years time and do it. And you might be busy with A levels or university jobs, and that is so fine. Like the cleft service are always going to be there. And there's also non-surgical routes. It might be that they might be able to offer you you can go back for braces and you can go back for more orthodontic work as well. So it's not always just the physical appearance stuff. It can also be that I think some services might even offer being able to go back just for psychology. So it's all those aspects as well. And I remember when I went to my surgeon and I was talking about having a rhinoplasty, and he said why do you want to get this done? And I just said, I want to feel more confident. And he was like, I'm not doing that surgery. And he just flat out was like, I'm not going to do that because that's too much pressure on me to like do a surgery to make you more confident. He was like, your nose is really nice, like don't do any, like come back in a few years if you still want it. And actually I really valued him saying that, because he could have done it there and then and said, okay, we'll put you on the list. But I never actually went through the surgery because I kind of took time away and went, what was I thinking? Like, why would I go through that? So sometimes as well, surgeons might like, or psychologists, someone might kind of think it's not in your best interest, but it doesn't mean it's a no forever. Like if you do go back in a year or so and say, no, I really do want this, then I'm sure that they'll take that into consideration. But it might be that it might not be like the right time for you, or they might think, spend a couple of years just, you know, loving what you've got. And then if you still don't love it, then come back. But yeah, the transition, you can feel like it's a real race to get everything done, especially when you're young, because you're like, my parents are definitely like, get it all done now while you've got the time. And my dad was born with a cleft and he's like, get it all done and then you'll just be done for life. And I'm like, I can go back when I'm 70. It's okay. And I think that's the real like beauty and luck of being born with a cleft, is that you can go back at any time. So don't feel like you're in a race when you're transitioning to adult care, because that adult care will be there forever.
That's a really good point, and a question I often ask. I think our surgeons think I'm a bit stupid because I always ask this question, but I'm usually asking it on behalf of the individual who's in the room, the patient, which is, well, just because we've said you've said we can do this jaw surgery from the age of 18, but we don't have to do it then, do we? Because it's easy to think, because these things are available to you after a certain time point, because you finish growing, because you're dentally ready, whatever, that doesn't mean you have to do it then. It's available to you from that point. And I completely agree, there's no rush to do these things. And for some people, it's really important, like you say, Claudia, to do these things as soon as possible, to do them now, to try and get things done before I go to university or before I move on with the next stage of my life. But that puts a lot of pressure on everybody. And we probably all know that things don't always necessarily fit in that time scale. Everybody's different. You know, there's a process of orthodontics before you have jaw surgery. Sometimes we have a COVID-19 pandemic that puts everything back, or, you know, the Queen dies or something happens. And, you know, I always say to people, don't put your life on hold. Don't take a gap year expecting to get everything finished in your gap year and then go to university. If you can, try and get on with your life, and we'll try and fit this in. You know, we'll try and work around that. But really important not to put everything on hold in order to get everything done now and feel that you've got to get it all done before you can move on to the next stage of your life. You know, your life and what you want to do next should be the most important thing. And these options are all here on the table. And like you say, they're not going to go away. And you can come back to us at any time when it's the right time. And if the right time's now, great. But if not, you know, come back to us. And even if we discharge people, I know we've got some questions later about discharge and coming back. Even if we discharge people, we normally say to people, we're going to discharge you. That just means we're not going to keep sending you appointments to come back. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, if you ever want to come back, you can come back to us and we'll have all your records and all those things will still be on the table. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I'll take us to the next question, which I find is really interesting. Does my cleft team or hospital change?
Do you want to go this time, Helen?
Yeah, so that one, yes and no, really. So as we've mentioned, people going to university and all that sort of thing, or they move, then they might want to change. So just the practical aspects of, you know, where they are. But the next part of it really depends on what cleft service you're at. So if you have a service such as Evelina or South Thames, because they've got adult services within, I'm correct in saying that. And certainly when I used to work in Manchester, they would, because the children's hospital was within the adults, they were in the same hospital and it was quite nice. But if you're in a children's hospital, such as maybe Alder Hey or Great Ormond Street, we don't have adult services. So they'd have Birmingham. Yeah, exactly, Birmingham. So they'd go to Queen Elizabeth or Aintree in the case in Liverpool, or ourselves. But let's focus on somewhere like Birmingham. So they would be in the children's hospital, but then they would physically go to that adult hospital. But they might well be seen in the cleft team in the children's, or unless they have like an outreach in the adult hospital.
Just around the legalities around adults being seen in children's hospitals.
Absolutely.
somewhere like Great Ormond Street, you're not, I mean, obviously parents take their children there, adults are allowed in the building, but you wouldn't see adult patients in their own right in a children's hospital. So in a service like ours, the Evelina London Children's Hospital is on the site at St Thomas's Hospital. We run all of our cleft clinics through St Thomas's Hospital, where we can see everybody from, lifespan within our building. There's no restrictions on that. And so our clinics are all very mixed in ages. We don't run separate children's clinics and adults clinics. So one of our clinics, I was in clinic today, and there's everybody there from newborn babies all the way up to adults, individuals born with cleft. And so we're able to provide that. So the transition from children's to adult services in our service probably doesn't feel that dramatic. When I was saying you can still come along with your parents, it might not feel very different, actually. You turn 16, you're still going to come to the same clinic, see the same people in the same building. It might not feel very different at all. But if you go somewhere like Birmingham, for instance, you'll go to the children's hospital until you turn 16, and then you'll go to the adults hospital. And you'll probably still be able to take your parents with you, but you're going to a different hospital. You'll probably see the same team of people. I don't know if they have different surgeons for children and adults, but you may not even see the same team.
Does it?
You may transition to having a surgeon who does more adult surgery versus the paediatric children. So that's a long answer, but I would give the same answer as Helen. It's a yes and no. It depends which service you're under. And the services, what I do know is that the services who have those different settings for children and adults do work really hard on the idea of transition and trying to make it a smooth transition, trying to prepare young people for the change of moving to an adult hospital. And the team still liaise within themselves and discuss. So we do try and work particularly hard in those services to ease that transition and to have a transition plan and leaflets and information and support around that transition. So yes, sometimes your hospital changes and sometimes your cleft team changes. Like Helen says, if you move away, we're always happy to consider transfer of care to the service nearer to where you're going to be living. And that's really important. For instance, people will say, well, we want to stay under you. We've been here all the way through. We want to stay under you. And we'll say, that's fine. But we're here in London and you're going to university in Durham and you want to have jaw surgery and there's 18 months or 2 years of orthodontics in the run up to jaw surgery. And that's going to mean an appointment every 4 to 6 weeks to have your brace adjusted. And then in the run up to surgery, you're going to have all these planning appointments. And if you're up in Durham, is that really going to work for you? And you might find it easier either to transfer to your nearest cleft service or to wait until you finish university and not put that on yourself at the same time as being at university. So it's really important to think about those practical things.
Thank you so much. I know the next question, we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but just in case you wanted to add some more. So the next question is, when do you get discharged and how long do you have to have treatment?
We should probably guess the answer to that. I mean, I would say you get discharged when you're ready to be discharged. That should be how it is, because you've reached, in agreement with the team that you're under, you've reached the end for now of your treatment journey. So you've had all of the treatment that you think you want to have for now, and you're ready to be discharged. So there's no specific cutoff for anybody of when you must be discharged. Treatment doesn't run out. It should be a negotiated sort of discharge and agreement. And for a lot of people, that means we see you when you're 15, we might see you when you're 18, and the 18-year appointment will likely say, look, we'll put you in an appointment for when you're 20, and we'll check in with you then at that point. And if at that point you're still sure you've had everything you want and need to have, then we'll discharge you at that point. But discharging you just means we're not going to be actively contacting you and actively sending you appointments. But you can always come back if you want to. So you don't have to have any treatment, and not having to have treatment starts very early on. I mean, you have your primary cleft surgeries, which are considered, pretty much essential for your lip and palate, maybe your alveolar bone graft. And then after that, most treatment from then on is elective, optional, in discussion with parents and with young people. So you don't have to have any treatment you don't want, and you don't have to be discharged until you're sure you don't want anything more for now. Would you agree, Helen?
Yeah, I think
Lots
the
of
only
people
thing
nodding.
I'd add is how long do you have to have treatment? So we kind of keep you on till 18, but that's a bit selfish, really, because we have this thing called audit. So we have to submit these figures so that CLAF teams can show that what their outcomes are. So some of the appointments might be a little bit around that. So there's that kind of bit to it. And we like to sort of see you kind of around 18 just to signpost you on and as Kate said, just to give you that open door. But I haven't really got anything else to add really from what Kate said. Really, there's no have to about it at all. Really, it's just that the initial primary surgery and bone graft are the main surgeries. Really.
Yeah. Did it feel like that for you guys, the volunteers, Claudia and so on? Did it feel like that for you, that there was no treatment you had to have and you could, be discharged when you were ready?
I definitely think like I remember it's something that I kind of only learned later on in my journey, but like how to actually advocate and say no. Like it's so okay to kind of like when I was 11, 12, they were like, we want to do braces. And I was like, no, thank you. And even then, like I found it really hard to actually say, oh, actually okay. Like mentally I wasn't in the space to lie down in a dental chair and have braces put on me. And it took all the way until I was 17 until I got braces. And I was adamant that I wasn't having them. And then it was from my like osteopath psychologist, and we worked together. And then it was only at 16, 17, I was ready to actually have them. And it was so much better doing it that way than forcing my body to go through something it didn't want to do, just because like an ideal time is for something. So like equally, if you're being told you need to have braces, it's so fine for you at 11, 12, 13 to say, actually, I'm okay, thank you. And for everything to be your own choice. Like I think it's really important to have your own choice. It's your journey, it's your body to do things too. So it's like if you don't want to have braces ever, like that is so okay. Like I think sometimes it baffles surgeons or orthodontists. They're like, my teeth were all in different directions and they were like, how do you not want to fix this? But I just didn't see a problem with the way I looked. And it was only really as I got older, when I was like 17, I was like, okay, yeah, let's do something. And I think he was like clapping his hands at the idea. But I think it's really important like as a parent to support your kids to really make their own decisions. And I think also as a parent to understand your role in helping to advocate for your child, but that like you can also say to the surgeon, like, hang on, maybe we should wait a while, my child's not ready. And that is so okay. Like everything is your own choice. But yeah, as we're coming to discharge, I kind of was the one that was leading the way on that. Like I was done with all the treatment. I'd had a few appointments about possible surgeries and I kind of was like, oh, actually no thanks. And they kind of said to me, is there anything else you need? And I was like, I don't think so, I think I'm all done. And that was it really. They were like, okay, well, like we'll see if you ever have any other questions. And they kind of gave me a phone number if I ever wanted to ring and ask questions. But it definitely felt more personal. Like as you get older, I think it becomes more patient-led anyway. But it definitely felt like if I wanted to carry on for another 10 years, they would have happily sat in those chairs for 10 years and talked to me. So yeah, it definitely is more person led, but I think having your own choice of treatment is really important. Even like with bone graft, like it's obviously important you get it done at a specific time, but afterwards, like I needed a break, I needed time away, and that was so okay. It was the best thing I could have done. So yeah.
I think a good question to ask is when you're being offered or considering any treatment is, do I need to do this? As in, if I don't do this and if I don't do this now, will anything bad happen? Our surgeons often will say to them, look, nothing bad will happen if you don't do this. Obviously, we're surgeons and we love doing surgery, or we're orthodontists and we love straightening teeth, but nothing bad will happen to you if you don't do this now. And so, will anything bad happen to me if I don't do this? And can I come back and do this in the future if I want to? And if the answer is no, nothing bad will happen to you. Nothing's going to disintegrate. Nothing's going to go wrong if you don't do this. And you can come back to us at any time in the future and we'll consider that. And if that's the answer to those questions, then you kind of know, okay, so it's up to me. Nothing terrible will happen if I don't do this now. And if I decide in the future I want to do this, I can come back and do that. And I think that's a really good question. Like I say, I was in clinic this afternoon and there was a lady there who's come from overseas and wasn't aware that there was cleft care available to her. And we went through this whole long list of options of things that she could do. And we said to her at the end of this, but the most important option that you should know about is the option to do nothing. You don't have to do anything. And if you do nothing, nothing terrible is going to happen to you. So there are all of these options that you can weigh up, and she's going to see psychology to go over all the options and think about it. You know, there's quite a personal cost to any of these options because it involves treatment and time off work and finding childcare for her kids and so on. But there's almost always the first option you should always be given is to do nothing. And that's always a really reasonable option. You don't have to have any more treatment. The option to do nothing is a really important option.
Thank you so much for sharing your ideas on this. Now another important question. How can I access the Cleft team as an adult once I've been discharged?
So I'm part of the patient engagement group. So that's probably why I'm being included in this live stream today. So that's part of the big focus of the patient engagement group. Claudia is a member of it as well, is how people can return. So some teams have really taken this on board, particularly CleftNet East. If they've got a form that they can return.
Yeah, I mean, so I would repeat first of all that everybody is entitled to cleft care. You're born with a cleft, you're entitled to cleft care, and you're entitled to cleft care across the lifespan. So that's not in question. How you get referred back to cleft teams, CLAPA would like and is advocating strongly for, and I completely appreciate that, for adults to simply be able to refer themselves back, to be able to ring up the cleft team and to just be able to come straight back. And I think most cleft teams would agree with that. The NHS is clunky though, and the NHS doesn't necessarily, it's all to do with funding and bureaucracy. And at the moment, the system in England, anyway, it's a little bit different. In Scotland and Wales, the devolved nations, you are able to truly self-refer yourself back to cleft care in those parts of the UK. But in England, the way back into a cleft service is through your GP or through your dentist, your what we call the GDP, the general dental practitioner. So your GP or your GDP, dentist or doctor, family doctor. And but the GP or dentist are not gatekeepers. They can't deny you access to cleft care. Sometimes GPs don't fully understand how to do that. So what we've done in our service, and I think it's similar to CleftNet East, is to produce a sort of a document or a form that you can download from our website that explains, yes, you're entitled to cleft care, print off this form to help your GP, basically. So you can take that to the GP, and on there are the instructions for the GP for how to find our service on the system online, so it's not a case of persuading your GP. Your GP won't and shouldn't need persuading to refer you back. Sometimes they just don't really understand how to do it. But you're absolutely entitled to cleft care. You're absolutely entitled to come back. The most straightforward route at the moment in most English cleft services, for sure, is to go to your GP, and if you can go back with that information that tells the GP, literally click on this link, follow these instructions, this is how you refer me, this is my cleft team, thanks very much. So that's where we're at in our services, that we have that online form. It's about to go live just to help people, but you're absolutely entitled to cleft care, and we will be glad to see you. It's just the bureaucracy around getting there that can sometimes feel a bit clunky.
I think as well, I was just going to really quickly add that I think, because I know that it can be tricky for some people to kind of get referred back and stuff, for people that are kind of finding that pushback is like to not give up, because sometimes you do have to fight for things in life a little bit, and sometimes you have to fight for your own cleft care, and I think you have to be sometimes a little bit bullish about it and a little bit like, I want this and it's going to happen and you're going to make it happen. And I think if someone's telling you no, you don't need to be rude, but kind of like explaining the situation and letting them know, because there will be people out there that have never heard of cleft, never have any experience, and like a GP might not understand that there is actually availability of a lifespan care for cleft. And sometimes it's a simple, like, actually they are, like, is available. I know that CLAPA have like a form as well online that you can get for referring to, I think, dentists and to the cleft teams in dentistry and everything. But I just think sometimes you do have to be a little bit like, I'm gonna be confident it's gonna happen and you're gonna make it happen, because sometimes I do think you might get a bit pushback. But if you do, just really keep going with it, keep pushing, it will happen. You can contact CLAPA. I know that they can always help out and stuff. But yeah, don't like feel disheartened if the first time you try, because I think sometimes that, especially if you're returning after a long time, it can feel like that's the first big step. And if someone's saying no already, you're like, I don't want to go. Just keep pushing and fighting, because the people are there that want to help you. It's just sometimes that access, but definitely just yeah, keep fighting, keep pushing. You will get there someday. So
And I
yeah,
think
don't
that's
feel
where,
disheartened.
Claudia, I think that's where CLAPA are really useful with this patient engagement, returning adults and all that sort of stuff, because it's out there. So I'll often sign patients or, a returning adult to the CLAPA pages so they can check things out, really, because you're absolutely right. I've certainly known GPs to not know that there's a service and just know it's cosmetic, like, and that's what I've heard say. So absolutely, I agree with you.
And we've never had a GP in all my time here. We've not had GPs refuse to refer people. The problem we've had is that GPs don't really know about the services.
Exactly.
And the other problem is that people born with a cleft don't necessarily know about the services. So we get quite a lot of people come into our service via the dentist who says, oh, hang on a minute, you were born with a cleft. Did you not know there are cleft services available to you? So, even before you get to the point of seeking a referral, lots of individuals affected by cleft themselves don't even know that the services exist. And I think that's getting a lot better, particularly with the work that CLAPA's been doing to advertise and advocate. So the difficulty we've had with GPs is never them refusing to refer somebody, it's them not knowing. And if you think about how many millions of GP practices there are out there, we think it's getting better, but there are lots of GPs who they might only have met one or two people born with a cleft, and they definitely don't know about cleft services and how they're set up. So that's what we're trying to do, is provide individuals with that information. CLAPA is a great resource for that. You can find out where your local cleft team is, cleft service. You can go to your GP and say, this is my cleft service. And if we can give you a bit more information to give to the GP so that the GP can make the referral, great. And then at that point, we've never had a GP refuse to refer with that. They just need the information. Yeah.
Just to add to what Claudia said about not stopping, because I had a similar experience that I faced a lot of issues with the GP to get referred to the cleft team, because they might not know why you need to be referred, or they might be asking not the right questions. I found that CLAPA helped me a lot at that stage, and also mentally, to have someone to support you and know that they have your back and you're not asking something irrelevant. You're asking something that you are allowed to, and it's your right. I think that was really important in my case.
Lovely, thank you. That's really, really great advice. Thank you so much. So the next question is, I'm moving away to university and have changed dentists, but I've developed a real fear. Can the cleft team support me with this?
I think that's a question for Kate.
It's a psychologist on the call. Well, there's sort of two bits to that. The one is I'm moving away to university, and we've already talked a little bit about what point in your care you might be at, what point in treatment you might be at the point where you're moving away to university. It's interesting that this person's talking about developing a fear of dentists, and yet you'd hope that they've been in cleft care up to this point, and at sort of 18 when you're moving away to university, I'm guessing you've had quite a lot of orthodontic work, and you should have been all individuals under a cleft service are expected to have a general local dentist as well for their dental health. So it's a shame if this person feels that they've sort of not had support earlier on, and it's only at the point where they're going to university and changing dentists that they're struggling. So the psychologist and the cleft team absolutely provide support around coping with and managing treatment. And dental phobia and difficulties, is a common issue for lots of people, cleft or not. So yes, psychologists in the cleft team will do work with people around dental phobia, which is anxiety, around accessing treatment. It's a little bit complicated here. I'm thinking as a psychologist, if I had that contact, is this about cleft care or is this about general dentistry? Either way, the psychologist in your cleft team will at least think with you and understand this and think with you about who's best placed to support you with this. So again, I gave the example of Durham before just because it's quite a long way from London. I would be saying to somebody, let's think about who can support you locally. And if you're going to be having dental treatment locally, who's going to be the best person to support you with that? So yeah, fear of dentists is a common one. Psychology will support you with that, but it's going to depend on where you are, where you're living, what services you're trying to access, and also whether you are in a sort of active treatment phase or not. Doing a lot of work around phobia and anxiety. If you're not actually going to be having any treatment, you need to kind of actively be in treatment to try out all the techniques you're learning and to kind of get past that phobia. That was a bit woolly, wasn't it?
I think that you've said something interesting, Kate. It's like, what happened? Why did they get that phobia? Because you're absolutely right. In cleft services, we have dental nurses, and somebody mentioned the giraffes and the princesses. They're often in the dental clinics, in our clinic rooms. And also, because obviously I mainly tend to deal with children and babies, we always say to register with the dentist and get, even for just without a cleft, to get used to the dental chair. So there's a lot to be said to take your register and take your baby to the dentist just so they get used to that environment to stop those phobias. And obviously we can't unpick what's gone on, but I think Kate's right. It's like, how did that happen? Because we would like to think that it's not in the old days where they used to attack you with a drill and everybody was frightened and you just went to the dentist and you got a filling because that's how it was. So yeah, it's so I was probably saying, just like anybody listen to call, if you have children, just to take them to the dentist just to get used to the chair, if nothing else.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people will avoid treatment. You can keep a dental phobia under wraps to some degree. If you've avoided having too much dental work, if you didn't need a lot of orthodontics, for instance, and you've managed to avoid it, often is the case. And it's only when you reach a point where you need some active treatment that you realize quite how bad this is and quite how much of an impact it's having. So I think it is possible that you could sort of avoid all things dental without acknowledging to yourself or anybody else that you actually have a real issue with this, and you probably do need some help. A lot of people feel quite embarrassed about that. So yes, I think the idea of we try and develop that resilience and that confidence, very early on. So I think there are lots of factors that can go into people developing dental phobia and avoiding addressing it. But I would also say I really like working with phobia because although it's really debilitating and really horrible as a psychologist, working with phobia is really, there are lots of techniques for getting over phobias that if somebody is motivated and willing to engage with you and willing to work through the steps, and we talk about graded exposure and so on, there are some really effective psychological strategies to help people completely overcome phobias and be really, feel really proud of themselves for getting past it. It's the treatment for phobia can be really, really effective. So yeah, it feels really debilitating and terrifying, but if you're motivated to treat it, it's one of the, I don't know, the easiest things for psychologists to treat, but it is pretty straightforward to treat.
I was just going to really quickly add, because when I went to uni, obviously I moved away and I had to go to a dentist on my own, and I had dental phobia, like diagnosed, and used to see a psychologist. I could not stand the dentist, and it was purely just down, well, I don't like needles, but that's another story, so that was part of it. But a part of it as well was lying back in that chair and losing all control and like not being able to control the situation. And going to university, I was petrified because it's like, I can't take my mum because she lives so far away, and like my friends, like, you don't want to go to uni and be like, hey, can you come to the dentist with me, and be really vulnerable in front of these new people. And I think what I worked a lot with a psychologist and my parents was learning how to advocate for yourself and actually going in there and saying, hey, I actually do have phobia of the dentists, and kind of talking them through like what is kind of okay for me, and kind of walking through, I'm just going to sit down on the chair and like just start with that and like get to know that dentist, and do kind of like, I kind of worked up a little phrase of myself saying, like, I was born with a cleft, I've had this surgery, this is what kind of dental treatment I've had, just because it kind of gives them an overview of what treatment you've had, and sometimes they won't be able to access your notes, so having all that information for them is like a little spiel about, hey, this is me, and then saying, I am a little bit nervous of the dentist. Like, I've not met a dentist yet, ever, and I've had many that will say, oh, I'm not going to treat you then, or just lie back in the chair, it's nothing. Like, they're all really sympathetic, because dental like phobia is nationwide. Whether you have a cleft or not, it's worldwide. People like are going to be afraid of everything. So like, if you have a cleft or not, you're gonna like, you might have a fear of the dentist. So for me, like, they've always been really supportive. But yeah, having a little like thing you can say to them, and just kind of taking it all, like we've said so much I think today, like taking everything at your own pace, really having that choice. And like, sometimes I'll be in the dentist and he'll say, oh, we're just going to do this, and I'm like, oh, no thank you, I'm done now, yeah, and I'll just sit up on the chair, and they're like, oh, I'm like, no thanks. And it's like, if it's not gonna decay my teeth, we're leaving, because like, it's okay to do that. Like, you have your choice, it's your body, your life. And I think that's really important, that like, if you are moving away from uni, well, for uni or a job or something, and you don't have your parents for the first time, like all my friends, I was like, guys, I'm going to the dentist, and I came back and they're all like, wow, we're so proud of you. So I think it's like trying to find something good to do afterwards, celebrate that as well, like have a little win for yourself. But yeah, having those little phrases, I think, always backs up is helpful, because I think transitioning from children to adults, even just transitioning in terms of jobs in uni, having something that kind of says about your cleft. But also, like, I know this is less relevant to transitioning for care, but even with friends and stuff, like, I think it's a really big point that cleft is not part of your identity. And I actually really struggled with this, of like removing my cleft from myself, because my psychologist used to say, you don't go and say like, hi, I'm Claudia, I was born with a cleft. Like, you're going to say, hi, I'm Claudia, and I have this hobby and this hobby. And I think it's removing that, even though it feels so big because it's been your whole life, that actually it's okay to leave that and like that be in the past. But yeah, like in terms of seeing medical professionals, like as you're kind of transitioning and moving away, kind of just having something that kind of sums up all your cleft treatment, I think just really helps them get an understanding. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Moving to the next question. I'm starting my first job and I'm not sure how to explain about my cleft to my colleagues. Does anyone have any advice on this?
I think Claudia, I think you touched on that in your last answer, didn't you, really?
Yeah, I was going to say, so obviously I've been to uni and I've worked a couple of jobs, and now I'm working in my local Cineworld, and I actually don't think you have to address it. I think it can feel really massive when you're coming out of like all your treatment at 17, 18. I was like speaking to my psychologist, I was like, how do I mention this to all the people at uni? And she's like, but why do you think you have to? And people don't talk about why they wear glasses, or like, I wear hearing aids. Like, I don't need to tell people why I wear them. It's a little more important for the fact that I need to be able to hear them. But, people might not explain why they're wearing a blue jumper. So why do you need to explain you have a cleft? And I was like, so true. And I really struggled with it at the beginning, because I thought, I'm going to go meet these people and they're not going to know a massive part of my life, because for me, cleft really was a big part. And actually, when I got to meeting people like now, I don't mention it at all. Like, it's just something, just go, oh, hi, I'm Claudia, nice to meet you. Okay, what are we doing today? Like, I have never mentioned my cleft to people that I've worked in the past 2 jobs that I have, and no one questions it. Someone might say to me like, oh, like if I'm talking about, oh, when I had surgery as a kid, they're like, oh, why did you have surgery? And then I'll talk about my cleft. But I think it's actually so okay to never mention it, and no one is expecting you to mention it. And I think sometimes a cleft can feel really big because it's been part of your life for so long, and it's something that's been focused on for so long with your cleft treatment, and it's really visible. But actually, to so many people, they barely notice. Like, unfortunately, people don't care how we look as much much as you think they do. Like I walk down the street and I'm like, everyone's looking at me, and unfortunately they're really not. They don't care because they've got lives. And yeah, like looking at like the scar on my face, like if someone at work was to mention like the fact that I look different or I have a cleft, I would probably leave the job, because that's not somewhere you want to be. You don't want to be someone that's going to be supportive. But I mean, obviously, Kate, you'll be able to add to it, but I definitely feel like I don't feel the need to mention it. It can feel weird because it's been a big part, but I struggled with that at the beginning, but now I barely mention it. I don't think I've ever mentioned it to people that I meet, which feels so weird, but Kate, you'll be able to add more.
No, I completely agree. I think it's your business. If you want to talk about cleft, of course, talk about cleft. If you don't want to, there's lots of things that are massive in your life that you wouldn't tell people the first time you meet them. And you will naturally talk about when you know people better, because it's part of who you are, it's part of your story, and you share all sorts of things with your friends, but probably not the first time you meet somebody. When you walk into a new job, I agree, it would be weird to go, oh hi, I was born with a cleft. Okay. But I think, sometimes I talk a lot with people who are worried that they might get asked a question, and sometimes people do get asked a question. I would still agree that talking about cleft should be totally under your control and totally up to you how and when and what you share. But sometimes, occasionally, people are asked a question and it can throw them, or the fear that they might be asked a question can be really terrifying. And I think it's worth knowing or having an idea of what you might do or what you might say if somebody asks a question. You might start a job and somebody might say, oh, were you born with a cleft, or did you have an accident? Or they might say something, because people are not always socially appropriate. They might, people do sometimes. So I think it can be worth having an explanation. I think, Claudia, you would be really comfortable with explaining about cleft and not getting in a pickle about it, because sometimes we talk about how it's just a cleft, which I know when cleft's been a massive deal, to say it's just a cleft feels really sort of undermining. But to be in that place where you can go, it's just a cleft, it's no big deal, is actually quite helpful. And I sometimes talk with people about a little sort of mini technique that actually I stole from Changing Faces. The organisation Changing Faces published some various resources and information. And there's a little sort of technique or tip or strategy that we psychologists often share with people called explain, reassure, distract, ERD, explain, reassure, distract. And that's the idea of, if somebody were to ask you a question, for a start, you're absolutely within your rights to say, I don't, that's not really something I want to talk about, or it's not relevant, or I'll fill you in another time. That's fine. But if you do feel, put on the spot, sometimes it's really effective to give somebody an explanation just to answer the question, but you get to explain in as little or as much detail as you want. So you can give somebody a really simple explanation. That's the E bit. You can just say, oh, I was born with a cleft. Sometimes you might say, just means I had a gap in my lip when I was born, or my lip didn't join up fully when I was born. That's the explanation. The reassure bit, the R, is, gosh, it was a long time ago. It's not that big a deal. I had some surgery when I was little. I've just got a scar, that the mark just shows where I had the surgery when I was little. That's the reassure bit. It's not a big deal. I was born with a cleft. It's not a big deal, And then the distract, the important bit, the D, is moving the conversation on. So you can say, oh, have you worked here long? Or, the weather's terrible today. Or is there anywhere good around here to go for lunch? Or, gosh, I'm a bit nervous today because it's my first day in the job. But you still do something to move the conversation on. So you give a basic explanation that shows that it's not some big, terrifying, awful thing. Yeah, there's a basic explanation. So that's the E. You've reassured them it's not that big a deal. It was a long time ago. And you distract. And if they ask another question, say, no, but go on. You can do the same thing again if you like. Or you can just say, oh, honestly, it's not that big a deal, and move on. But sometimes people find that helpful, just to feel a little bit prepared, that they've got something very basic they can say that they're comfortable with. So if they are put on the spot and somebody asks a question, they don't panic. They can reassure everybody it's not big, because if it's not a big deal for you, it shouldn't be a big deal for them, and you move them on. And if they keep coming back to it, that's not socially okay. If people don't pick up on those social cues of, I don't want to talk about this anymore, it's okay to say, you know what, it's not the most important thing about me. so let's move on. So yeah, but that would be my sort of backup. I would agree, Claudia. You don't have to introduce it. You don't have to explain about your cleft to your colleagues. Sometimes it can be useful to have a bit of an explanation if you want one. Does that help? Does that fit with what you're nodding as I say that, Claudia? But would you agree with that sort of strategy?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I remember my psychologist saying, like, it sounds really stupid, but before you go to uni, like, role play with your friends. Like, have your
Yeah.
friends come up to you and ask you questions. And it does feel weird, but I feel like the most of the time, like the adults that I have, like worked with and stuff, they normally don't mention it. And if they do, it will be out of curiosity. And sometimes I'm like, I'm able to educate you, like come and I will talk to you about it. But I have friends that have clefts and they are like, actually, I don't really want to talk about that. And they just move it on and don't make it like an awkward thing. They're just like, oh, actually, I don't want to talk about it. And like you said, they will just kind of distract that conversation. But I think sometimes as well, finding some humor in it. I remember I worked with some kids last year. And I was picking them up from school, and they told everyone in the class that I was born with a fake nose. And they came up to me, "Oh my
Yeah.
God, you were born when you have a fake nose." And I was like, yes, yes, I do. You are correct, part of it." And they were like, "That's so cool, oh my God." And they were like, "I know." And it was just like, "All right, should we go to the park now? Let's go there. Come on." And they found it really fun. And I think sometimes you have to find the humor in these things. But yeah, having those little sentences definitely really helps. But I would say just don't worry about it. I think having the backups to know what to say. But yeah, I say you will realize, like, as I've gotten older, that not many people really care. And it's really annoying because you're like, I've gone through this massive thing, please care. But people don't really pick up on it. And if they do, the people who will ask you will probably ask you a bit further down the line when you're probably a bit more like comfortable to talk to them about it. But yeah, even if it's just I was born with a cleft, that's it, move on. They can Google it. So yeah.
Really great advice. I love that advice. That's brilliant. So moving on to the next question. What does a good transition pathway look like between those children and adult services? And when should those conversations about transition begin?
Does a good transition pathway look like? Yeah, I mean, we sort of talked a bit at the start, didn't we, about how cleft services are different in terms of transition. So to me, a good transition pathway looks like it's not really a transition pathway in that there should be a seamless, it should just be, as you grow and change and your needs grow and change, that the service meets your needs. And it might meet those in a slightly different way because your needs have changed and because you've changed and because you're becoming more adult. So to me, a good transition pathway looks like you start to take on more of the information for yourself, make more of the decisions for yourself, but you're still well supported by family and friends and by the service itself. I think that's the kind of most important bit of the transition. I suppose in services where you're moving to a different hospital, then a good transition pathway would look like, you have a good understanding that you go into a different building, that you've been supported around doing that. And that's a bit vague, isn't it? I guess I just struggle with this concept of transition in cleft, as you can tell, because to me it should just be a seamless, you just grow up with the team, and as you grow up, a bit like parents with children, the team should adapt to you and change how it supports you, and you become more adult in your attitudes and understandings and take on more of your own decision making. So yeah, Claudia's nodding. What do you think is a good transition pathway?
I was going to say it's so hard because I think the beauty of cleft care is that every single like cleft patient's journey will look completely different. So my transition is going to look so different to my friend's transition. Some of my friends who went to different hospitals like got shown around the hospital, so they got shown where the cleft department would be and got to meet the team. Some of my friends, their orthodontists kind of changed as they got into adults, so they met those orthodontists at like 14, 15, so their 16-year review when they like changed into adults, that would be the kind of they know who the faces were. But for me, my transition was right in the middle of COVID pandemic, so that was fantastic timing. So for me, I was 18 just before lockdown hit, and everything moved online. So I kind of started using an online platform to meet my team, and the team didn't change too much. But I would say a good, like, I honestly completely agree. A good like transition would be that you don't notice that you've transitioned. I think it's like for me because my hospital didn't change, and even the waiting room didn't change. I was still in the same waiting room with the same kids' toys. And I think it is just about like, you know, having the conversations of understanding you're now in the adults department. So like you're gonna not go to a children's ward if you have surgery. But yeah, I think like the team will change with you and they will kind of I mean, I saw a psychologist, so they kind of helped change the you know the way that I was being taught to as I grew up. But I think it's just like the way they talk to you and the way that they discuss surgery and the way that they'll kind of start just moving from looking at your parents to the eye line slowly moves to you. It's all those really subtle things. I think sometimes transition can feel like this really massive stage of your cleft journey, like moving from children to adults, but actually I was really disappointed that it was nothing. Like they literally were just like, oh, okay, hey, like welcome to the adults part. And I thought it was gonna be balloons and a whole cake. No, literally it's so deadly dull. It's nothing to it. So it's more just paperwork, like you said, like legislation paperwork they've got to go through. But yeah, I think the biggest thing I remember was like starting to sign my own name under like consent for stuff and everything. But yeah, I would say like a good pathway is that like you just feel really supported and that you feel like all your questions are answered, you have no worries. But I wouldn't ever think of this transition period being a really massive thing because like you will be really let down, like I was when it was online and I was like, oh, there's no party for the fact that I finished in children's now. So yeah, maybe don't get your hopes up, but yeah, definitely just I think for me it was having everything answered and having someone in the line, knowing what to do, knowing what was coming next. All those things were like for me what made that transition like a positive one.
Right. Thank you so much. Moving to the next question. I'm worried about advocating for myself in appointments without my parents there. Do you have any advice? I think, Claudia, you already covered that a bit, but do you have something else for advising?
Yeah, I mean, Kate will be able to kind of see where I'm going with this, but I used to always like they would ask me a question and I'd look to my mum and I'd go, yeah, okay, go answer it for me then. Or like I'd be like starting to say something and I'd just start looking at my mum to be like, yeah, carry on what I was going to say because I feel really awkward. And it can feel really awkward, like telling your surgeon or I want more treatment or starting to get asked the questions. But I think like the psychologists are really there to help you out with this because I think advocating for yourself anyone, born with a cleft or not, is a really big skill to have to be able to advocate. And especially when you're 16, 17, and you're in a room of professionals that have like worked their lives to get here, and you're just there like, hi, I want something different, or I don't like the way you did my nose 20 years ago. Can we redo it? But I think it is just feeling confident in yourself and knowing that like your emotions are normal and valid. Like everything you're feeling is okay because it's your emotions and nothing is wrong. And I think, yeah, just kind of finding empowerment. But I definitely think for me, like my psychologist worked a lot with having those sentences and feeling confident that actually I was the most knowledgeable person in the room about what I wanted. And I think for me, when I met my surgeon to talk about having a possible rhinoplasty, I kind of went in there and I said, like, you know, they kind of start the conversation a little bit anyway, but they kind of say, is there anything that you'd like to talk about? And I just kind of said, yeah, actually, I'd like to talk about a possible this and that. And I think it's not finding anything a bit awkward and not feeling bad for, you know, kind of saying things and kind of being a bit more like outspoken. But for me, advocating is a really big part of learning how to grow up in general. But I think just finding confidence in knowing what you're talking about and, you know, your emotions aren't wrong.
So the next question is, can you still have speech therapy as an adult?
Yes, you can. Yeah. I guess as you've got older, you've probably got more things to correct, the speech therapists probably say, because you might have developed bad habits and accents and all that sort of thing. But yeah, absolutely you can. But I guess perhaps because you are an adult, you can do the exercises where you don't, as a child, you're not going to be compliant, you're going to run around and not particularly want to engage and all that sort of stuff. So obviously you're more engaged and more focused and you're in control, but absolutely you can have speech therapy as an adult.
Mm. Yeah, sorry, my Wi-Fi was rubbish there, but I would add, if speech therapy is suitable for you, because obviously not everybody's difficulties will be fixable with speech therapy. So if the speech therapist will absolutely provide an assessment for anybody, including for adults, and if there's anything that they can offer that's within their skill set and which is suitable for you. I think, Helen, I don't know if you'd agree, I think speech therapy can be harder for adults in some ways because children are learning patterns, and having speech therapy when you're younger, I don't know if it's more effective, but I think it's easier for children to absorb the speech therapy into their natural day-to-day speech. I think adults have to work a bit harder at making the changes and then remembering to keep the changes. I think when you're a child, you learn it, and the idea is it becomes part of your normal pattern. It becomes the way you speak, whereas for adults, I think it's much harder for them to generalize it into to normal speech. But our speech therapists do a lot of work with adults. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It depends what if you need therapy or you just want to change your voice. It could be that you actually don't need it. So there is that as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much. One more question. What if I have to leave my hospital due to age before treatment finishes? Getting to know a new team worries me. What do you advise in this situation?
Hopefully we've covered that in that.
Yeah,
Do you think they mean because they're moving geographically to another part of the country, or I wonder if this person's getting at this idea of this, and maybe it's a bit of a myth that when you turn 16, your cleft care finishes and you've got to leave and you're all finished, because hopefully we've reassured people that there should be no panic about ending cleft care. Your cleft care will end when you are ready to end your cleft care. You might need to transition to a different hospital if you're moving from children's to adult services in some parts of the country, but your cleft care, there's no need to panic about cleft care ending before you're ready. So hopefully we've been able to reassure people a bit about that tonight.
So Gillian's just put in the chat that it's about somebody moving geographical areas.
Yeah, so your cleft team will transfer will liaise with the cleft team. If you know where you're going to be going and you can talk to your existing cleft team about that, they will liaise with the cleft team you're going to and arrange essentially a transfer of care. The clinicians will talk to each other. We've had somebody move into our service recently from another part of the country, and I had a long chat with the psychologist in that part of the country with the patient's consent so that we could do a handover, and I met her before she joined. So an adult now, young adult, I met with her online before she came to her first appointment. And we did sort of a handover of the medical records and medical information, but a big sort of psychological handover, if you like, to make sure that when she came for her first clinic appointment, she would come with, I was there on the day she came for a clinic appointment. We'd already met beforehand. I was able to support her and advocate for her and introduce her, if you like, to the team. So I think all CLAP services work like that. We all liaise with each other very carefully if we're transferring people's care from one part of the country to another. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for tonight. So if you would like to provide us with any feedback, we would be incredibly grateful. There will be a link to this come out in the chat. There'll also be a link provided to CLAPA support services where you can access peer or parent support, the CLAPA counselling service, or our cleft mentoring service. If you have been affected by anything discussed this evening, then please do reach out for support through your GP, your local NHS cleft team, or you can email info@clapa.com.
So some very important thank yous. Firstly, thank you so much, Kate, Helen, and Claudia, for giving up your time to answer all of our questions and also sharing your personal stories as well. This video will be available on CLAPA's Facebook page straight away, and a subtitle version will be posted on CLAPA's YouTube page as soon as possible. And of course, a big thank you to you, Kate, for taking your time out to volunteering as a host for this evening.
And to you as well, a big thank you to you for also volunteering this evening.
Thank you.
Lastly, we'd like to say thank you to our funders, the National Lottery Community Fund and Smile Train. what an interesting evening it's been. If we didn't get around to answering your questions in the chat, then remember you can get in touch at any time at info@clapper.com, where CLAPA staff can help point you in the right direction. We really hope you've enjoyed the Q&A and that we'll see you again at one of our upcoming online events in the future. From all of us, good night and have a lovely rest of the week.